Howdy, gang, and welcome once again to the Duct Tape Studios. I'm Jeff McAleer, your host here at the Gaming Gang channel. Thanks for joining me once again. Today, I am going to share my review of Castles and Crusades Players Handbook Reforged Edition from Troll Lord Games. This is written by David Chenault and Matt Golden with Stephen Chenault, Mark Sandy, Todd Gray, Jason Bay, and James M. Ward. This 288-page hardcover carries an MSRP of $39.99, or you can grab just the PDF alone over at DriveThruRPG for $19.99. All that said, let's swing on over to the other camera because here I've got the Reforged edition of the Player's Handbook for Castles and Crusades. A few things to mention before we get stuck in. First of all, my friends over at Troll Lord Games were kind enough to provide me with this review copy. But neither I nor anyone else affiliated with the Gaming Gang has received any other sort of compensation for me to share this review with you. It's important you know that. We're also not going to look at each and every page of the book, but I do want to give you a good feel for what you're going to find inside. And then lastly, even though this is the Reforged edition of the Player's Handbook for Castles and Crusades, this is not a new edition of Castles and Crusades because Troll Lord Games doesn't release new editions. They do new print runs, and there might be a tweak here and there. There might be some changes in those print runs. Mechanically, the game remains the same as what hit stores back in 2004. So this is not a new edition like you would maybe see with Dungeons & Dragons, Pathfinder, Traveler, Call of Cthulhu, and any number of role-playing games, which has been around for a good number of years. It's just not something that Troll Lord Games does. Now, you also might be wondering, well, wait a second, Jeff, I know the previous print run of the Player's Handbook had this really cool homage cover of Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, at least the first edition of it. And this has that as well. How can I tell what is the Reforged edition and what's just the previous print run? And that is the badge in the upper left corner. That is going to show you that this is a Reforged edition of the Player's Handbook. All right, first thing we're going to do is we're going to take a peek at the credits page. A lot of folks worked very hard to bring this to life, so let's give credit where credit is due. You may have seen any of my trio of Castles and Crusades main book reviews. I call them main books, not core books, because really the only book you need to own is this in order to play and run Castles and Crusades. You don't even really need the Monsters and Treasure book if you have a monster manual or some sort of bestiary from early years of D&D, although the Monsters and Treasure book is excellent. I'll be reviewing that a little bit later on this month, as I will the Castle Keeper's Guide for Reforged Edition. But this is the core book. The other two books are main books, in my opinion. And the Castle Keeper's Guide is just all optional material and advice on running the game. So it is not something you must have, like, say, the Dungeon Master's Guide for D&D. All right, so as far as this Reforged edition, first thing I want to mention is all of the open game license content is gone. In fact, Stephen Chenault told me that he rewrote all of the spells in this book. That is like over 100 pages of spells. So that is a lot of rewriting that took place, but everything from the open game license is gone. If you're not overly familiar with Castles and Crusades, it is a fantasy role-playing game. It is not what a lot of people consider to be OSR, although I have a different definition of OSR. So it fits my definition, but many people it wouldn't, because this is not built on original Dungeons & Dragons or Basic Expert or Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. This shares a lot mechanically with 3rd edition D&D, although there are radical differences, but it does share far more DNA with 3rd edition than it would OD&D, that's for sure. But this does have an old school mentality to its approach, not only in gameplay, but also game rules. Because even though this clocks in at 288 pages, Castles and Crusades is a fairly rules light role playing game. This has more of a rulings over rules vibe to the proceedings, which I absolutely love. Now, as far as our characters go, that's what we're going to start off the game with, is character creation. And we have our traditional attributes. We've got our strength, dexterity, constitution, intelligence, wisdom, and charisma. We have what's known as primary and secondary attributes. So if you're a human character, you get to choose 3 of those attributes as primary. The other 3 will be secondary. If you are non-human, you get 2 primary attributes and the other 4 are secondary. And that's because if you're a non-human, you've got other special abilities that the human characters don't get. So one aspect of those prime attributes that's important is you must have the prime attribute of the class you want to play. So if you wanted to play a bard, one of your primary attributes would have to be charisma. Doesn't matter what the score in it is. It could be a 12. Doesn't matter. It does have to be your primary attribute, one of your primary attributes. So we've got our traditional range of 3 to 18. We've got our modifiers, which are positive or negative, which will be added or subtracted to your 20-sided die when you're going about your action resolution. Now, as far as our classes, we do have a dozen traditional classes here. We have an optional assassins class, which is also part of the proceedings. We have rules for multi-classing if you want to as well. One of the cool things about Castles and Crusades is that the characters can advance beyond the 24th level. Granted, beyond that, they're just getting a handful of hit points added at each new level. But I also like the fact that there's so much going on as they level up. Now, depending on the class that you choose, you may see new special abilities, new bonuses pop up every time you level up. So some classes have very few dead levels, as we would normally refer to those, where all you get are just some hit points. Although there are 2 classes that do have a lot of dead levels, and those are clerics and wizards. And the reason behind that is because of their spell casting. Now, we also have druids as well as illusionists. And I have to say, I really like the illusionist magic in Castles and Crusades. It's unlike anything else I have seen in fantasy role-playing games. And playing an illusionist can be very, very cool, unlike in some fantasy role-playing games where they just seem pretty weak. That is not the case here. But as far as the clerics and the wizards, they don't actually start getting these bonuses, these special abilities, until they hit the 13th level. And that's because they have some pretty powerful spell lists early on. As far as the various different classes go, they feel pretty balanced. I can't tell you, as far as in gameplay, does the monk come across as being a lot weaker than some other class? I can't tell you that, but it just comes off as being pretty nicely balanced. We do have our races. The races are our traditional races that we see: the elf, the dwarf, the halfling, the gnome, the half-orc, and of course, the human. And each of the races will get about a page devoted to them and discuss their various special abilities, or maybe even some weakness that that race may inherently have. We'll get into some equipment, and then we will move into our magic. And Castles and Crusades does use a Vancian magic system. Another aspect of Castles and Crusades I've always liked is it's very modular. So I already pointed out that Castle Keeper's Guide is all optional material and advice for the Castle Keeper. Well, there are some various different magic system options that are available. So if you're not a fan of Vancian magic, you can just unplug the magic system and plug in a magic system which you like better. I love that. I think that's very, very cool. As far as combat goes, combat is more theater of the mind. It's not very tactical. Now, granted, we do have some combat maneuvers and things like that can take place, but this is designed more for theater of the mind. For the spells, we've got loads of them, over 100 pages of them, and we are going to see them broken down by originally class and spell list by level. And then when we get into the descriptions, they will be by class and alphabetical. I'm going to actually just rock on through this because we've got loads and loads of spells. As far as the production quality, the paper stock, this is a nice paper weight. It does have a little bit of glare to it. I know that bothers some folks, so I want to point that out as well. Something that threw me is this background, this green background. I don't know how well you're seeing it on camera. It is darker than the previous print run, and I do find sometimes the text almost bleeds into it, which I found to be really strange. But I even have the 9th print run of the Players Handbook, and I don't know if you can really tell very well. But this is lighter. That green here is darker than this green. So I'm hoping the next print run, they lighten up this background, or to be honest, they could do away with it. I don't think it really brings that much to the table anyway. So as far as running Castles and Crusades, we've got those primary, we've got those secondary attributes. So outside of combat, if we're looking at action resolution, regardless of what's being attempted, you're actually going to have the primary attribute is going to be easier to succeed than the secondary attribute. So the way it's written, if you're attempting to do something which utilizes your primary attribute, you need to roll 12 or higher on your 20-sided die, and you are going to be adding modifiers to it. If it's something that's related to your class, you'll actually add your level to it. And then if it's something which is going to utilize your secondary attribute, you need to roll an 18. And once again, you will get to add your bonuses. You'll get to add your level if it's something related to your class. There aren't a ton of rules about success or failure. We don't have tons and tons of rules about just the gameplay. And that's why I had mentioned this is more about rulings over rules. It's designed not to slow down at the game table while your castle keeper tries to look up some rule that might be in here, might not be in here. That's not what Troll Lord Games was aiming for. They're aiming for nice, quick, theater of the mind play at the game table. And I really like that a lot. But that doesn't mean you don't have crunch. There's a little bit of crunch in here. And of course, the Castle Keeper's Guide has way more crunch. Now, as far as that action resolution, we've got the 18, we've got the 12. Those numbers can also change based on a challenge level. So the more difficult something is, we're going to actually, as the Castle Keeper, add to that target number. What I would recommend, and a lot of people, what they do is they just make the starting target number 18. And if the player's character has the primary attribute that they're using, they get to add an additional 6 to their die roll. It just seems to work better that way, as opposed to the, well, is it a 12? Is it an 18? I know it's still the same thing, but it just seems to work a lot better if it's just adding 6 and you always are looking for 18 with the challenge level. So keep that in mind. I love the fact that this game, you can easily convert old D&D and third-party adventures and modules and so forth to this. practically on the fly for, say, like AD&D and second edition AD&D adventures. I think that's really cool. So we're going to wrap up. We're going to get a spell reference here, which I liked. I thought this was very cool. So at your fingertips, you've got some of the important information about all of the different spells. It is presented alphabetically. And then we're going to wrap with our character sheet. Dual sides. Artwork throughout, very solid. There are a few new pieces. I didn't notice a ton of new artwork, although this book is 48 pages longer than the previous print. So there is that. I did notice some of the artwork is from other Castles and Crusades releases over the years. I'll be very honest, I did not do a page-by-page comparison between the 9th print run and this Reforged edition. But for the most part, a lot of the artwork is the same. So even though there are some new pieces of art, to my untrained eye, there is also a lot of the artwork we had previously, which is fine because I think the artwork within is pretty nicely done. All right, so that's a peek at the Reforged edition of the Players Handbook for Castles and Crusades. Let's swing on over to the other camera. I'm going to share some final thoughts and give this a review score. Now, if you've seen my previous review for the Players Handbook, I really dug it a ton. I think Castles and Crusades would be my absolute go-to if I were looking for a classic fantasy role-playing game that I could utilize older modules for, but still have a far more modern mechanical approach to the proceedings. Castles and Crusades is a no-brainer. It is an excellent fantasy role-playing game, just on its own merits as well. Don't get me wrong. You don't have to be, I want to use AD&D modules. You don't have to, right? There's plenty of content out there from Troll Lord Games as well. I'm just saying one of the great selling points is there's just so much material out there that you could utilize for Castles and Crusades without having to go to an OSR retro clone and going through some of the clunk that we have from the 1970s and early 80s. So I gave the Player's Handbook a 9.5 in my original review, and I'm going to go with the same score this time around for the Reforged Player's Handbook. And the reason why this is not a 10 out of 10 is that damn background being a little too dark and some of the text, at least to my eyes, kind of getting lost in it as I was reading. It was a little more difficult to read with the Reforged edition compared to the 9th print run. But that's the only quibble I've got. Castles and Crusades Player's Handbook is excellent. I highly recommend it. A 9.5 out of 10. And of course, I will be sharing reviews of the Monsters and Treasure book and the Castle Keeper's Guide later on this month. All right, that's it for this time out. If you like the video, by all means, please give it a quick thumbs up. Subscribe to the Gaming Gang channel if you haven't already. And if you do subscribe, don't forget, ring that bell, because it'll not only let you know when I share videos such as this review, it'll also inform you when my live stream, the Gaming Gang Dispatch, airs Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday evenings right here on YouTube at 7 p.m. Central. Of course, when you're not watching videos on the Gaming Gang channel, be sure to visit thegaminggang.com for all the latest in tabletop gaming news, reviews, and a whole lot more you will not find on YouTube. You know the drill. Get your geek on at thegaminggang.com. Please consider supporting the Gaming Gang over on Patreon. Thanks again for watching. Once again, I'm Jeff McAleer, and until I see you next time, certainly hope all of you get to enjoy plenty of great gaming with your gang.